Welcome to an Arirang special. I'm Jongun in Seoul. The U.S. presidential election is less than a week away. As the big day draws near, campaigning gets fiercer between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump for their race to secure the magic number of 270 out of 538 Electoral College votes. We take a look at what the atmosphere is like in the U.S., what are election prospects, and how its outcome would impact the Korean Peninsula and the world. This program is jointly produced by Arirang TV and Voice of America. I'd like to welcome Jessica Stone, VOA correspondent, joining us from Washington, D.C. Also,
Hello.
we're joined by Kim Hyun-wook, president of the Sejong Institute, and Connor Fiddler, Associate Deputy Director for the Asia Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, for insights on security and foreign policy. Also joining us are Kwon Tae-shin, former Vice Chairman of the Federation of Korean Industries, and Scott Garlis, founder and CEO of Bent Pine Capital, to give us insights on the economic and trade agenda. Thank you all for joining our conversation. Jessica, I want to start with you. Latest polls show a very tight race between Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump, particularly in key swing states, including Pennsylvania. What's the sentiment there in the U.S.?
Well, it is really neck and neck here, especially in the battleground states. We just had some polling coming out earlier today, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Michigan, showing that the candidates are either tied or just separated by one single point, which is well within the margin of error. And the contrast here is really that the national polls are showing Harris ahead, but the critical battleground states that will decide this election are showing these two candidates neck and neck, which effectively means they're either tied or, as I said earlier in the latest poll results, just 1 point apart. Important to remember here, of course, that the popular vote does not elect the U.S. president. That person has to win 270 electoral college votes. And so we're really closely honing in on states like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Georgia to see how those pan out.
Right, so it's really hard to tell. And early voting is well underway in many states, with millions of Americans having cast their ballots already. It's setting records in some states. What does this enthusiasm tell us?
Well, it tells us that Republicans are getting on the bandwagon, essentially, with early voting. We saw in 2020 that we had a lot more people overall early voting. Of course, we have to remember that was during the COVID pandemic and all of those restrictions, so there was a bigger motivation not to vote in person as a result. And at the time, Republicans were also instructed by Donald Trump not to vote in early voting. He said that those systems were suspect. Now he has changed his tune, and he's encouraging Republicans to vote both early voting in person and early voting mail-in ballots. So we are seeing a spike in those numbers in some parts of the country. We have one exception, though, that's Pennsylvania, where we're seeing Democrats doing more of that early voting. And remember, those votes are not counted until Election Day. So we expect this to drag on well past the end of Election Day in terms of getting results.
And let's now shift our focus to North Korea and security. Mr. Fiddler, South Korea's intel agency assigns odds to Pyongyang conducting its 7th nuclear test after the U.S. presidential election. If Mr. Trump is re-elected, would he declare North Korea a nuclear state? On the other hand, what would be Harris's North Korea policy to address its nuclear and missile threats at a time when it looks to be on the back burner compared to the two major wars happening in Ukraine and the Middle East?
Great. Thanks for having me. In regards to Trump and what his policy would be, I think it's unlikely that Trump would allow North Korea to be a nuclear state. Recently, a senior foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump, who served in the last administration, Robert O'Brien, quickly criticized this idea and that the U.S. policy should continue to be denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. I think that would probably continue to be the administration's policy if Trump is to win. In regards to Kamala Harris, I think there's going to be a lot of continuity in regards to Kamala Harris's policy on the Korean Peninsula and Biden's approach to the Korean Peninsula. As you mentioned, there are ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East. I think Kamala Harris would probably continue support in that region and would continue the Biden administration's policy of deterrence on the Korean Peninsula in order to keep it stable so the U.S. can keep its focus on Ukraine and the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Here in the studio, President Kim, when Trump is reelected, what are the chances of another summit between him and North Korea's Kim Jongun after the Hanoi summit that ended up in a failure more than 5 years ago?
Well, as Connor stated, I think it's right that the foremost priority for Harris or Trump lies in other areas, including China and Taiwan Strait and other areas, Ukraine and Middle East. So I think North Korea area and issue is pretty much down the list. Maybe Trump wants to manage the North Korea issues, and I think he would definitely welcome any talks to begin with Kim Jong-un. I agree with Connor that the Trump government also will stick to the denuclearization policy officially, but I'm not sure what's going to be the substantial contents of negotiation between two leaders. Maybe Trump wants to manage the North Korea threat, wants to make the threat dormant rather than to be overt. Not completely, gearing towards denuclearization, but even in the interim deal, maybe Trump will give something more than expected from the South Korean perspective. If some sort of freeze deal is made and Trump gives some sort of incentives like sanction release, I think that will be a big shock to South Korea. Kind of think that South Korean people and government would think that maybe the United States still stick to the denuclearization policy, but in reality, just freezing deal is something that is completed and would not go into the next step of rollback or denuclearization. That will be some kind of a risky thing that we have to face.
Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, economy is among the key agenda for the election. On that note, Minister Kwon, the Biden administration has signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, to bolster supply chain and invest in clean energy, as well as the CHIPS Act, that promises funding for companies building chip-making plants in the United States. Would the election outcome affect the fate of these laws? What does that mean for the EV battery supply chain and chip makers, including South Korean companies that are making investments in the U.S.?
Yes, because the U.S. Congress passed the IRA and CHIPS law, Korean companies promised to invest in USA, huge amount. Since 2017, when President there was Korea was now the largest investor into the states. The aggregate amount since 2017 is $150 billion. And last year, Korean companies in USA increased employment more than 20,000 people. So if the Trump, we hear in the newspaper, Trump is threatening to get rid of the IRA and CHIPS Act, then because the construction cost in the States and then labor cost is very high in the States, and without subsidy, then our companies should reconsider it because it is not beneficial for us to invest there. So it is a very important issue to us. And because as a government to government, U.S. Congress passed a law, and then we relied on it, and then we planned it. But suddenly, if you go back, it is a big problem.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Garlis, the economy is a top issue for many Americans ahead of the election. What are the tax plans, respectively, by Harris and Trump? Well, how they affect the U.S. economy as well as the world economy?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. So the tax plans between Harris and Trump they're very divergent. Harris is talking about raising the corporate tax from 21 to 28%. She's also talking about increasing the capital gains tax from 20 to 28%. And she's talking about increasing taxes on the wealthy, which is basically the socioeconomic class that has the greatest propensity to spend. Conversely, Trump is talking about dropping the corporate tax from 21% down to 15%, and he wants to set the 2017 tax cuts as being permanent. Now, both have floated out the idea of exempting tips, Social Security payment, and overtime wages. The price tag for Harris's spending and tax plans is $3.5 trillion in deficit spending, and the price tag for Trump's plans is estimated to be $7.5 trillion in deficit spending. But when we look at this and we think about it, we have to consider the changes that are probably going to happen in Congress during this upcoming election. Now, right now, it's estimated there's a 90% chance that the Republicans are going to take back control of the Senate. And so one thing a lot of these Republican senators are expected to do is to be more fiscally responsible. Now, neither of these plans are probably going to get enacted, the ones that are being floated out right now by both Harris and Trump, because they're going to create so much more deficit. From my checks in D.C. and the people I know there, they're saying Republicans are interested in maybe a $2 to $2.5 trillion worth of deficit spending. So when we think about all these things and how it's going to affect the U.S. economy and the global economy, what that tells me is some of these big promises that are being made on the campaign trail right now are going to fizzle out by the time they get into action in D.C. because Congress isn't going to allow them to happen. So what that tells me is we're probably going to see spending levels stay about the same. Economic growth is going to stabilize more. So that should be a good thing for the U.S. economy, and I would think that would be a good thing for the global economy in general.
Staying with you, Mr. Garlis, eyes are also on how the candidates would address U.S. inflation. What are their policies to bring prices down, and how will inflation look like under a Harris or a Trump presidency, and how would it impact economies around the world?
Yeah, so they've both floated out a couple of ideas here, too. One of the big ones that Harris is talking about is banning price gouging. She's pointed to groceries in particular. She's also talking about lowering healthcare costs, eliminating junk fees like ATM surcharges, and she's talking about boosting the housing supply. Now, if we just look at these plans, banning price gouging, that's going to wind up hurting consumers in the long run because, one, they'll have a hard time getting it through. Two, companies will figure out other ways to pass these costs on. Investing in clean energy, they've been trying to do that. That's been expensive. That's going to hurt consumers as well, probably. Eliminating junk fees. Let's look at banks, for example. When they've tried things like this in the past, that winds up getting charged somewhere else. And then boosting the housing supply. When I hear about boosting the housing supply, I think about the financial crisis back in 2007, 2008. The problem became we jacked the housing supply up so much that there were too many houses, prices collapsed, and we ran into a big economic problem. I don't see any of these ideas as really solving the issue of inflation. And then when we look at Trump's plans, Trump is talking about unleashing U.S. energy. And what he's talking about there is drilling for more oil and gas. He's also talking about cutting federal spending. Elon Musk, who is supposedly going to be a part of his cabinet, has talked about being able to cut $2 to $2.5 trillion in spending right away. And then he's talking about ending wars abroad. In particular, he's focused on the war in Ukraine, and he thinks there's a lot of wasteful spending going on there. They're also talking about cutting regulation. That was a staple of his first term in office. That would be a positive because that could get businesses to do more and spend more. And then he's also talking about reducing illegal immigration. What he's talking about there is he's saying there's a lot of money being spent on housing, food, healthcare, a lot of handouts that are going to immigrants. Now, again, if we go through and look at all of these items, unleashing U.S. energy would bring down energy prices. That would drive headline inflation lower. That would also put more money back in energy companies' pockets. that wouldn't be a bad thing because they would spend more, hire more. That would get the economy going. Cutting federal spending, I feel like this idea gets floated out there by a lot of people all the time, and they have very little success. If they can get it done, great, but there could be a job cost that comes with that too. So we'll see. Ending wars abroad, I think they're going to get pushback from some of the top members of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell in particular. They're not interested so much in giving up in Ukraine in particular. They don't want Russia to be able to take the country over. Israel, I think Trump is going to stand very much behind Israel. He has in the past. So I don't see him pulling back from supporting them. Cutting regulation, like I said before, that would be a good thing. That's possible, and that would be economically stimulative. And then reducing illegal immigration, I get it, and I can understand there are going to be efforts there, but we also have to look at that from the standpoint that all of this immigration has boosted labor supply in this country. What that increase in labor supply has done, it has started to fill a bunch of jobs. It has reduced the amount of available jobs out there, and it's brought the labor demand and supply picture back into better balance. And that has been really key to bringing down inflation. So, I don't know what kind of success they're going to have in that arena, but I think if they go after that, they should be careful what they ask for, because they could wind up stoking inflation a bit if they kill labor supply. Because when workers see that there are more jobs and there are less people to fill them, they're going to ask for more money, and they're going to be quicker to switch. And then in terms of the U.S. economy, again, I see a lot of these ideas being floated out there as great ideas ahead of election. I don't know that there's going to be tons of follow through on some of these. So I really see a lot of this is winding up being status quo for the U.S. economy. And again, because it's the biggest economy in the world, I think that trickles down and filters out to every other economy, and demand, especially for exporting nations. U.S. consumers will still buy a lot of goods. So I don't see a ton changing on that front as a result. Basically, what I see going on now with inflation is, with economic growth stabilizing, inflation's doing the same. I think that trend's going to continue.
All right. And to you again, Jessica, I want to ask something else. Harris and Trump are clashing over reproductive rights. What are their contrasting views on abortion, and how are Americans reacting to this issue?
Yeah, we saw Vice President Kamala Harris talk again about that issue at length during her 30-minute speech on the Mall this evening here in the United States in Washington, D.C. She continues to support Roe v. Wade, which, of course, was overturned by the Supreme Court in 2022. She does not want to move away from the way that set up abortion access in the United States. She does not support a federal abortion ban. She says President Trump does. She said that again tonight. He does not support a federal abortion ban. She continues to say that if she is in the receipt of any legislative action to open federal abortion access up again, she would sign that. What Trump does is he supports returning the decision back to the states, which essentially is what the Supreme Court did. Now, that has resulted in about 13 states completely banning abortion access, and he has been critical of those more stringent abortion access restrictions, particularly in the state of Florida, where he lives. So he's really trying to moderate the Republican Party position on this issue, while she continues to paint him as the antithesis of what she stands for, which is a continuation of Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm. And aside from that, immigration and border security have become one of the most disputed issues on the campaign trail. How are the two candidates approaching this issue, and what does this tell about American society?
Well, this is the number 2 issue on voters' minds, and it does connect to the economic worries that Scott mentioned there. President Trump has really returned to the well of many of the policy proposals he had the first time around. He's talking now about deporting millions of illegal immigrants. He is talking about criminally prosecuting those who cross illegally and bringing back remain in Mexico, which kept asylum seekers in Mexico and did not allow them to be released pending their their adjudication of their asylum request here in the United States, the program which is also known as catch and release. Harris' proposals, she wants to go back to Congress and get them to pass immigration reform, which has so far for decades now not been successful. She wants to provide immigration pathways with ways for those who are already in the country awaiting adjudication to get a path legally to citizenship, and she wants more judges to be accessible. So a lot of the things that she's doing are proposals on the administrative front. She wants more judges. She wants more Border Patrol agents. She wants to restrict asylum claims, but they aren't effectively addressing what's going on at the border. Now, I should point out, just going into the election, we are seeing historic lows in illegal immigration. So for those that are particularly attuned to that issue, say in the swing state of Arizona, that could have some impact. But again, these people's economic livelihoods are being impacted in immigration. It's close to the hearts of many American voters, especially in the middle and lower income brackets, because their jobs are directly impacted by that surge of immigrants coming to the United States.
All right. President Kim, a few weeks ago, South Korea and the U.S. reached a deal, that is a special measures agreement on sharing the cost needed for some 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in Korea. Is there a possibility that former President Trump undo what has been agreed upon if he wins the election? And what would this whole Washington alliance look like under a Harris or Trump presidency?
Yes, I think we already know that what Trump did in his first term was to look at alliance from the transactional perspective. He thinks the alliance is something that chips away of the U.S. Cost and burdens on allies rather than allies paying for their own security. So I think it's highly possible that Trump will request South Korea to renegotiate on SMA, because that's not the issue to be, sanctions and the U.S. Congress afterwards. I think Harris and Trump's alliance policy is different, definitely. I think Harris thinks the U.S. needs to maintain global leadership throughout the global alliance systems. The United States, after the Second World War, have built up its liberal international order, and the global alliance system is one of the important assets of liberal international order. I think in that sense, I think Harris is resembling and continuing the U.S. posture towards the alliance systems. But I think Trump is a little bit smoother than first term. I think a lot of Trump people know that the global security environment is now worse than before. So alliance system is important to deal with all these security issues. But the unchanging thing is that Trump wants the allies to pay for alliance systems. That's what he's still arguing for. So I don't know. Nowadays, a lot of countries in Europe and even countries like Japan still wants to manage the alliance systems with the United States, but at the same time, they want to build up their own capacity, thinking about what will be the Trump risk. So I don't know if Trump maintains this kinds of posture. I'm just wondering how cohesive the alliance system would be if he's reelected.
All right. And Mr. Fiedler, what will a second Trump presidency mean for NATO? The Republican candidate has been demanding its members to spend more on their defense. In what way do the two candidates' views differ when it comes to alliance and partnership?
Yeah, I think when it comes to NATO, I think President Trump is really going to prioritize defense spending, particularly with a war going on in Europe, the first major land war since World War II. I think Trump is going to demand that countries like Germany in particular, France, spend more on defense and contribute more to Ukraine's aid, as well as to the NATO alliance system. I think there's a lot of speculation that Trump might pull out of NATO. I think a lot of those concerns are a little probably overwrought. There's still a lot of support for NATO, whether it's congressional leadership in Congress or amongst Republican voters. I think that when it comes to partnerships, I think Trump is looking for countries to embrace his agenda and step up. In particular, during his first administration, Trump had a very good relationship with the country of Poland. The Poland government really embraced Trump's policies and took his more aggressive style to heart and started to embrace a lot of the more forward-leaning policies that Trump was looking Europe to do. Similar in Asia with Japan, particularly Prime Minister Abe, kind of gave Trump a bear hug very early on after the election, and that led to a really strong relationship. I think as we look to the U.S.-South Korea relationship under a Trump administration, obviously, there's different leadership in Seoul right now than there was during the first Trump administration. And to what extent that might impact U.S.-Korea relations remains to be seen. But President Yoon has been much more, ambitious and more trying to strive for a more global South Korea. And I think Trump could really appreciate that and find a good partner in that. But again, as was mentioned, Trump is very transactional and might be looking for more cost sharing. As far as Harris, I agree. I think it's going to be a lot of continuation from the Biden administration, supporting allies, supporting partners. I don't think there will be a lot of tense moments. I don't think there will be a lot of hard conversations. But that I think that could also limit progress happening down the road.
Minister Kwon, how will the two candidates' tariff policy differ? Will there be more trade barrier? If that's the case, what does that mean for South Korea and how should it respond?
Yes. As far as I know, according to report, the Harris will continue Biden's policy. So trade cooperation with alliance country, but she will continue the non-tariff barrier against China. But according to newspaper, Mr. Trump will levy all the imports 10% tariff, and then especially for product of China, levy tariff is 60 to 100%. But according to Economics 101, it is a basic knowledge that if American consumer and producer need some product, even if tariff is levied, they need to pay the high price because the supplier would not take losses by paying tariff. They can find some other places. So at the end of the day, inflation in the States will go up. So it is a common trend that politicians try to satisfy voters for the short time being by using protectionism or popularism. But at the end of the day, it will hurt not only the exporting country, but also importing country. And if we continue to do it again, the protectionism, other countries, EU, China, Korea, Japan, will do protectionism, levy high tariff, then I'm worrying that kind of things will deteriorate the welfare of the whole world. And if it continues, it will be the situation like before World War II, beggar thy neighbor policy. So I'm very concerned.
Yes, and starts triggering inflation, you're saying. Mr. Regardless, Minister Kwon mentioned potential tariffs on China. How do you forecast trade and tariff tensions between the U.S. and China after the election? What will be the economic consequences around the world?
Sure. So I think if you want to think about Trump's ideas on China and tariffs, you have to look at his tariff minister-in-chief. And that guy is going to be Robert Lighthizer, who was a U.S. trade representative in the prior Trump administration. Now, when you think about Lighthizer, you have to understand one thing. Lighthizer grew up in Ohio. He grew up in an area that's now called the Rust Belt. It used to make a lot of cars, car parts, all these things. These are industries that China wound up coming in and taking over from America. Lighthizer has spent his entire career battling China, basically in different courts, for decades. So Lighthizer has a very slanted opinion about China in terms of he does not have a lot of faith in Chinese negotiations because he's tried to negotiate with China a ton in the past and it has failed a bunch of times. So Lighthizer is going to be very direct with China from the get-go. Now, it's going to take a while for him to get confirmed as a U.S. trade representative, if that's what he's going to be. So from my understanding, the Trump administration is going to put him in as chief of staff of the White House. And once he gets that role, he can start going after China on day one. And the big thing they're going to go after is the fact that the Phase 1 trade agreement that they signed when Trump was in office before, China hasn't lived up to that, in particular in terms of the purchases they promised to do above and beyond 2017 levels. So they're going to go after them from the get-go. You could see the imposition of tariffs as soon as mid-March. They're probably going to come more like April to June. And what Mr. Kim was talking about, or Minister Kim, I'm sorry, was talking about, you are probably going to see those 60% tariffs, although Trump recently was telling Bloomberg he could do something more along the lines of 50% possibly. But yeah, I think Trump is going to go after China right away. And the reason why he's going to do that is he is going to try to send a message to every other trading partner in the world. Back to what Colin was talking about before, I think Trump is going to use tariffs as a tool to try to get other trading partners, other countries to sort of do some of the things he's looking for, like NATO countries spending more on defense. So what that's going to do, from some of the estimates I've looked at and read, Nomura threw one out there the other day, Goldman as well, saying that could raise inflation in the United States by about 1%. Now, if that happens, all the ground we've made up since the 9.1% tariff level or inflation level back in 2022, it's going to drive it back up to 3% potentially. That would be a negative in terms of U.S. spending. The positive of this is the Federal Reserve has taken so long to reduce interest rates. The numbers I look at right now, they have about a 260 basis point or 2.6% cushion in what they can cut before they get to neutral. If tariffs create 1% inflation, that reduces the Fed's cushion a little bit, but they still have a lot of room to cut interest rates. So, tariffs are going to be negative for prices because, again, what Minister Kim was talking about, what he was saying was that tariffs, they will drive prices up to buy stuff from other countries, but U.S. companies are simply going to raise the prices on the goods they make and sell here at home. So it's not really going to help anybody that much. But be what it may, the Fed can still cut rates. The U.S. consumer can still spend. Consumption may drop a bit, but I think there will still be plenty of consumption, and the world economy shouldn't be hurt too badly.
Minister Kwon, adding on to what Mr. Garlis has just said, does an escalation of the U.S.-China tensions mean South Korea walking on a tightrope?
Yes, because China used to be our biggest market, but now our export to China has reduced about 30%. So, and U.S. is most important country to Korea. So as a small country sitting in between USA and China, it is a very difficult condition for us. But what I would like to emphasize, Korea has achieved a miracle. When I was in elementary school, our per capita GDP was $82, but now it's about $35,000, same level with Japan. It could have been possible because of free democracy and market economy and mutual defense agreement with USA. So I think value is more important than any other thing. Even though it is difficult, we need to share the importance of the alliance among countries with same value.
Okay. And Mr. Fiedler, military cooperation between Russia and North Korea is closer than ever. Following Vladimir Putin and Kim Jongun signing a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty back in June, Pyongyang is sending troops to Russia, apparently to help Moscow's warfare in Ukraine. So how would the two contenders deal with closer military cooperation between Pyongyang and Moscow?
Yeah, I think this is a really tough thing for both Trump and Kamala Harris, as well as the Biden administration. This is quite an unprecedented case happening for U.S. policymakers. We've never really seen North Korea be this forward-leaning, at least in recent history. North Korea has been somewhat of a pariah state off in the corner, but now with this close cooperation with Russia, they're supplying not only troops, but artilleries and missiles to Russia. I think how Trump and Kamala will handle this depends on, I think, how they look at Russia in particular. So, for example, Trump has been very adamant that he wants to bring the Ukraine war to an end, that he wants a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. And I think Trump and his advisors see a possibility to wedge Russia from China. Trump administration strategy has always been China focused, and it will probably remain a China first foreign policy as well as a defense policy. And I think they will try to wedge Putin from Xi Jinping. And as Russia and North Korea become closer, there might also be opportunities for the Trump administration to wedge North Korea from China. So there might be actually some possibilities there to separate the two. But Kamala Harris, I think, will probably see the geopolitical situation similar to how the Biden administration sees it, where it's actually one block of authoritarian countries trying to fight against Western democratic countries in both Asia and Europe. So I don't think that they will try to wedge the countries. I think they will see that as futile and instead try to develop policies that they've kind of built up over the last 4 years, pushing back against all three of them at once.
And President Kim, where does Donald Trump and Kamala Harris stand on U.S. support for Ukraine and the war in the Middle East?
Yeah, as Connor mentioned, I think Trump is willing to finish the war in Middle East. In Ukraine in 24 hours. That's what he mentioned. I think the Trump people already prepared how to end the war, kind of pressuring Russia and Ukraine in the same way. But the thing is that territories occupied by Russia would not be restored, to Ukraine. That's what I think Trump is willing to go for the ceasefire or end of war, which I think is not a good signal to NATO countries. Even though the war ends, Russia is still occupying the Ukraine territories. That doesn't mean that the NATO countries' security would not be guaranteed in the future. This kind of war in Ukraine can happen again because there has not been a fair punishment on Russia about the war in Ukraine. Harris, I'm not sure how she's willing to finish the war. I think she'll continue to supporting Ukraine, but fatigue on the war in Ukraine is rising up. So I'm not sure how long she can push it forward. They were supporting Ukraine. About the Russia-North Korea relations, I think Trump's idea is that if war in Ukraine is finished, the Russia-North Korea relations will fade away, or at least Trump will try to make it that way. But I think Russia's geopolitical strategy is a little bit different. Russia, I think, even though the war ends in Ukraine, will try to maintain influence in the European continent. And I think in order for that, Russia will need to gang up as many allies and partners as possible. In this sense, I think Putin wants to maintain relationship with North Korea. There's some different ideas booming up about the North Korea-Russia relations after war in Ukraine ends. About the Middle East issues, I think Harris already had some ideas how to finish the war. First is to supporting the right of the Israeli right to self-defense. Second one is to strengthen the civilian protection in Gaza. And third one is two-state solution of Israel and Palestine. I think Harris's policy is kind of gearing towards a more fair way to look at Israel and Palestine, which is a little bit different from the previous traditional way to look at Middle East from the U.S. stance. In contrast, Trump is very much pro-Israel. He thinks that he can, maybe the war in Middle East can finish if Israel wins the war, that's what Trump's pro-Israeli tendency will continue about the war in Middle East. So I think there's a little bit differences between two candidates, I think.
Excuse me, Jungmin, I would like to add one thing.
Yes.
The Korea invaded by North Korea in 1950. And then within 2 months, about 7/8 of Korea taken by North Korea. But with the help of United States and United Nations, Korea survived, and now Korea is almost advanced country. So Ukraine issue is not far away from us. It is the first invasion and occupation by big country after World War II. So if we admit it, then it can give a bad signal, lesson to other countries, including China. Korea is very much worried about it.
All right. And Jessica, the election is only a few days away. The candidates have been fiercely campaigning in battleground states. What will be their strategies in the coming days to persuade last-minute deciders or undecided voters?
Yeah, and that's not a big number to go after, but it is a decisive number to go after because these are the voters that can be dissuaded by weather, by last-minute changes in the schedule, or by availability of polling locations. And the candidates are really going after two groups of people. We saw this opening over the weekend for Hispanic voters when the Trump administration had this Madison Square Garden event where there were a lot of racially charged jokes and racial slurs, many of them directed at Hispanics. That has been taken as an opening by the Harris campaign to go hard after the Latino vote around the country, particularly in places like Nevada. She is now campaigning even more with female, Latina, and Latino, music stars and things of that nature to really get at that Latina and Latino vote. Secondly, they're both going after women. And the real open question here is we've seen Harris, even tonight, talk directly to women about reproductive rights. We've seen that one of the twin daughters of George W. Bush now endorse Harris and say that she is voting for Vice President Harris for the ticket. And Harris has been campaigning with Lynn Cheney, who is a Republican. She is reaching across the aisle in that effort. The question really now is, will Trump try to go after that female vote with the likes of Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, and one of the people he campaigned hardest against in the primaries? That's really an open question. She has made herself available, but we continue to hear from the Trump campaign that they have not been able to settle on any dates for her to campaign on his behalf. She could really open the door for some moderate women and some independent women to vote for the Trump ticket if she makes that argument on their behalf. But we haven't seen her being green-lit for that effort. And so it could well come down to these small groups of people in these swing states, Hispanics, women, and other racial minorities that can be targeted through these efforts. That's really what we're seeing in these final closing arguments. The economic argument from the Trump team and the moral high ground argument, sort of continuity, if you want continuity, vote for Harris. That's the argument coming from her campaign, even as we saw just a few hours ago here on the National Mall.
All right, we will have to keep a close eye on that. Thank you, Jessica. We'll have to leave it there. I also want to thank our experts, panelists, Mr. Garlis and Mr. Fittler, for joining us virtually from the U.S., and Minister Kwon and President Kim here in the studio. The 2024 U.S. presidential race has been unprecedented in many ways. The Republican candidate has survived an assassination attempt at a campaign rally, and there's been a last-minute candidate change for the Democratic Party after the incumbent president suddenly dropped out of the race. TV debates were fact-checked live. Now, the world is watching who will win the very tight race to the White House, which will have a significant impact on many parts of the world. You can find out up-to-date news and in-depth analysis of the election next week here at Arirang. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Thank you for watching.